My father's voice rolled across the probate courtroom before I even reached my chair. Couldn't afford a lawyer, he said loudly enough for the people in the back row to hear. I kept walking. My heels clicked against the worn tile floor of Norfolk County Court as I clutched my leather folder and took the only empty seat at the defense table. Dad wore the same smug expression I had known my entire life. My mother sat beside him with her polished smile. "This will be quick," she whispered. Their attorney, Richard Bellamy, straightened his silk tie and looked at me with a trace of pity. Judge Harold Bennett entered the courtroom. Everyone stood, and I rose automatically, 20 years of Navy service etched into my bones. Rain tapped against the tall windows as silence settled over the room. Bellamy stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is a simple estate matter." Then the courtroom doors opened. An older woman with silver hair walked inside carrying a sealed envelope. Judge Bennett saw her and froze. "Miss Holloway," he said, almost reverently. Bellamy's confidence disappeared. Margaret Holloway crossed the courtroom and handed the envelope to the judge. "Direct instructions from Linda Carter," she said. It was to be opened only if her granddaughter appeared here without legal counsel. The judge broke the seal. He read one page, then another. His expression changed so completely that my stomach tightened. Bellamy took the papers and turned pale. My father shifted in his chair. "What is it?" he demanded. Bellamy stared at the final signature as though it had risen from the grave. "This can't be," he whispered. That was the moment my family realized Grandma had never left them in control. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood beside Linda Carter's grave while my parents discussed her property as though she were already a forgotten chapter. I had arrived straight from Norfolk in my Navy dress whites. Dad barely looked at me. "Still doing all that Navy stuff?" he asked. The rest of the afternoon, my parents talked about taxes, the farmhouse, and how quickly they could sell the 12 acres that had been my grandmother's entire world. When I objected, my mother sighed. "You're never here." I had heard those words for years. Never here for birthdays. Never here for Christmas. Never here whenever they wanted a convenient daughter. But I was the one who called Grandma every Sunday. I was the one who paid for her new water heater. I was the one she trusted. That night, in a motel room that smelled of old carpet and rain, I opened Grandma's final letter. Her handwriting trembled across the page. "You were never hard to love, Emily. Don't let anyone rewrite your life." I cried harder than I had in years. The next morning, Dad called and said the probate hearing had become complicated and that I should hire a lawyer. But Grandma had never been careless with paperwork. I drove to the farmhouse and found my parents already there with a realtor. Boxes of Grandma's belongings sat on the porch. Inside, a picture frame in the hallway hung slightly crooked. I moved it. Behind it was an envelope taped to the wall. "For Emily, if necessary." Inside was Margaret Holloway's business card and another handwritten note. "Trust nobody else." I called Margaret the next morning. She answered on the first ring. "Your grandmother saved my career once," she said. "She was afraid your parents would try to pressure the estate." Margaret told me to come to court alone and bring no attorney. On the morning of the hearing, I stood in front of a courthouse mirror, buttoning my uniform and reminding myself that I wasn't a frightened little girl anymore. When Bellamy argued that my grandmother had become confused in her final months, I simply looked up and waited. Then Margaret entered the courtroom carrying a dark briefcase. The atmosphere changed instantly. She presented the judge with a thick file. Inside were medical evaluations, notarized property transfers, bank records, and pages of Grandma's own notes documenting every attempt my parents had made to pressure her into changing her will. Bellamy flipped to the final page and stopped cold. Margaret's signature verified every instruction. Judge Bennett reviewed the evidence and ruled in my favor within minutes. The farmhouse and the land belonged to me. So did the savings Grandma had carefully set aside. The court also ordered an investigation into my parents' attempts to manipulate her. My mother began to cry. My father looked at me as though I had somehow cheated him. I felt no victory. Only grief. After the hearing, I returned to the farmhouse alone. I brewed Grandma's terrible coffee and sat in her favorite chair while morning sunlight filled the kitchen. For the first time, I understood what she had truly left me. It wasn't the property. It was permission.
Permission to stop apologizing. Permission to stop earning love that should have been freely given. Permission to build a life that belonged to me. A year later, the porch had fresh paint. Roses climbed the old fence. The farmhouse had become a home again. I used part of the inheritance to create a scholarship for Native children in eastern North Carolina. My brother, Mark, started visiting more often. My mother eventually admitted she had spent years afraid of my father. Even Dad came to Grandma's memorial gathering and quietly told me he had been wrong. I didn't forgive everything. I didn't have to. I planted new flowers beneath Linda's old oak tree, sat on the porch as the sun slipped below the horizon, and felt peace settle into the places where bitterness had once lived. My grandmother had given me more than an inheritance. She had rescued me from a family that mistook loyalty for silence and taught me that the strongest legacy isn't land or money. It's the courage to finally choose yourself.